Now it's time to hear the stories of Utes in their own words. This is Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. Here's your host, Mike Lageschulte.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. Thanks again for joining us for Utes Insider presented by Pepsi and University of Utah Health. Could not be more excited about today's show for a couple of reasons. First off, this is our 20th episode of Utes Insider. That's a pretty significant milestone for a podcast, and you can find all of our episodes archived on UtahUtes.com under Fan Info and Podcast. You can also find them on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. The second reason is the biggest reason, and that's our guest today. We will be joined by former Utah and NFL wide receiver Kevin Dyson. During his career with the Utes from 1994 to 97, he was one of the best in school history. The Clinton, Utah native, ranking first in school history in receptions, second in receiving yards. He then became a first-round draft pick of the Tennessee Titans and played 6 years in the NFL. All great accomplishments, but perhaps he is best known for taking part in some of the most memorable plays in the history of the Utes, as well as the NFL. I want to go back to 1994, the Freedom Bowl win over Arizona. Utah fans, you might remember this. The first 10-win season in school history was locked up after quarterback Mike McCoy on 4th and goal heaved a pass towards the end zone. It was Kevin Dyson with the one-hand grab. Utah wins that game 16-13, one of the biggest plays in school history. Then on to the NFL in his second year. And you might remember this one pretty well also. A wild card playoff game against Buffalo on January 8th, 2000. 16 seconds left. Frank Wycheck laterals to Dyson. He goes 75 yards for the game-winning touchdown. It became known as the Music City Miracle. 3 weeks later, unfortunately for Kevin, he was on the other side of a big play. In Super Bowl 34, he was stopped 1 yard shy of the goal line against the St. Louis Rams. Instead of a tie, the Titans lose the game to the Rams. And for Kevin Dyson, you talk about 3 weeks going from the highs of highs to lows of lows. That's what happened to him about 20 years ago. So a lot to talk about with Kevin Dyson. We'll also talk to Kevin about what he's up to now. In fact, as we record this interview, our Sunday, October 25th, Kevin now lives in the Nashville area where he played with the Titans, and he's there with his wife and children. He is the pre- and post-game analyst for the Tennessee Titans radio network and 104.5 The Zone, so he will join us after his on-air duties are done for the day. He's also been a high school football coach. He's earned a doctorate in education and is currently the principal at a middle school in the Nashville area. So a lot to talk about. Should be a lot of fun. Former Utah and NFL receiver Kevin Dyson joins us in just a moment.
To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah Athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
He was a two-time first-team All-WAC wide receiver for the Utes from 94 to 97, and then a first-round NFL draft pick, the fourth first-rounder in NFL history. Kevin Dyson, one of the all-time greats who was inducted into the Utah Athletics Hall of Fame in 2014, joins us today from Nashville, Tennessee, where he is a middle school principal and also a radio analyst for the Tennessee Titans. Not sure when this guy sleeps, but glad he could join us and had some time to carve out for us. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Man, I appreciate it, brother.
Hey, first off, your Titans, a dramatic comeback today against the Steelers, a game of two. 5-0 teams, great game to watch in the early window this afternoon. They're down 17 points at halftime. Titans come back, and then the missed field goal, your team lost 27-24. How much fun was that to break down for you today?
It was fun. I think it was a tale of two halves. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers came out with that intensity that you expect from an undefeated team, and they came out to prove that we were the better football team. But true to a good football team that's resilient and shows perseverance, is well prepared, that second half was completely different. The Titans came out and turned the tide and took all the momentum. Essentially they ran out of time. But it's hard to overcome miscues in the kicking game and the last ditch effort aside. There was some things in special teams that I think you look back on, that's going to be one of those things you're like, man, we just don't do this. We have a chance to win that football game. But they're still a good football team. They played a tough battle against another good football team. Obviously, two of the best football teams in the National Football League right now, especially in the AFC. I'm excited to see what they have. They got one of those games coming up when you talk about next week when they play the Bengals, where a Bengal team who seemingly from a record standpoint should be just kind of like, let's get this win and get on. But this is a team that has been losing by a lot. They've been keeping games close. They lost in dramatic fashion again today to the Browns.
Right.
So this is a game. If they don't come ready to play, it could be an ugly night for them.
So, okay, I know it's early. Your Titans dropped to 5-1, but in terms of AFC playoffs, your Titans still got a chance to make it, you think?
Oh, absolutely. I still think they win the division this year. I think the way things are going on in Houston, they may get a little bit better, but they're such in flux right now with Coach being leaving. They lost some of the best talented receivers in the National Football League. I still think they got more questions than answers. I think the Colts are going to be someone to reckon with at the end. Phillip Rivers is a consummate pro, a guy who knows how to win football games in the National Football League, and you see them, they're right there in the mix as well. But I do believe the Titans win the division and get into the playoffs. Now, where they fit in that remains to be seen. The AFC is obviously strong this year. I mean, even teams, you can look at even Miami, a team that's right at 500. You know, they made a quarterback change, but they're a team that's going to be in the mix. Buffalo, of course, you can't rule out New England. And then, of course, the other top teams, the AFC, Baltimore, KC, Pittsburgh, and now the Titans. It's a competitive side of the football, the bracket of the conference. So, yeah, I think they'll be in there. However, it's going to be rough. Whoever comes out of AFC is going to be tough to beat them in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Chiefs look very good again. Ravens right there, and it should be a lot of fun. It's early, but 2 5-0 teams in your game today, Titans against the Steelers. All right, Kevin. Hey, listen, I wanted to talk some NFL, but so many things I wanted to get into with you. And I was on the Utah Athletics staff when you played your final 3 years at the U, and got to know you a bit when you came in for our Hall of Fame induction ceremony 6 years ago. You grew up in Clinton, Utah. You were an all-state defensive back for Clearfield High School. You led your team to the 1992 4A championship. At that point, what other schools were recruiting you, and ultimately, why did you choose to stay close to home and play for the Utes?
I had a few schools, Kansas State, Utah State, BYU, Weaver State, of course, all the in-state schools, I should say. Idaho State, Arizona State, Washington State. I had a few schools, but I ended up taking a few trips. And as it be, I had my trip to Utah the week before I went to Arizona State. And Ron McBride, head coach at the time, wanted me to commit at the time, but I had another trip to go. And as I mentioned before, it was Arizona State. And I got to Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, had a great visit. And at the end of your visit, usually they tell you they're going to offer you or whatnot, whatever happens. And their initial conversation with me was, we like you, we want you to come here, but we got to see what's up on a couple of scholarships. So I went home, came back home to Clearfield, Clinton, Utah, and I called Ron McBride and Fred Graves and said I was coming. I was in a position where I couldn't be without scholarship, waiting on somebody to figure out what's going on with a couple of scholarships.
Yeah.
And so I committed to Utah. But shortly thereafter, and I don't know how they figured this out, and this is before social media, I don't know how they found out, but the very next day, Arizona State called me and asked me, "Hey, why'd you commit? We got a scholarship for you. We just had to see what's going on." I don't know what that scene going on was, but they wanted to check, and they said, "Man, we really want you. We want you here." And I was thinking they were looking to offer a kid from California or something like that. Not the kid from Utah. So anyway, I did at the time. I wanted to get out of the state. I wanted to see what I can do, maybe in the Pac-10 at the time and be competitive in that role. And so I decommitted to Utah and committed to Arizona State. But while doing that, I called Coach Graves and Coach McBride, and they said, "Man, hey, come on up and let's have a conversation." And I was like, "No, I'm pretty solid in my decision. I'm good. I'm gonna stick with it. I'm gonna go to Arizona State. I'm going to get out of the snow a little bit and." Just kind of get away and try to see what I can do. And say, no, they said, "No, just come up." So I hung up the phone with them. And I told my mom, she was like, "You know what? You're going to be a young man. You need to be able to say that to them face to face. You made a commitment to them first. You need to be able to say that to them face to face. You got to be a man about it." So we drove up to Salt Lake City and we go to Rice Eccles, the facilities up there. And lo and behold, the Chicago Bulls are in the weight room working out and getting ready for the game against the Jazz that next day, I believe. Okay. Everybody but Michael Jordan, of course. Yeah. Everybody but Michael Jordan was on, of course. And so we go up, we talk, and we had a good conversation. I didn't make a commitment one way or the other from leaving there, but you can imagine a 17-year-old kid who just wants to play, who just wants a scholarship so he can go to school. My head was spinning. So a couple of weeks later, I did both schools still, kind of thinking I'm coming, I guess. And at that time, they send you have your papers, and I had both of them sitting on my coffee table the morning that we can sign with the FedEx, the folder. And ultimately, man, I decided to stick with my first commitment because they were with me from the jump. Coach Graves had been recruiting me since the beginning of my senior year, probably towards more so my junior year. I felt they wanted me from the beginning. I committed to them first. And so I felt like, that was the right thing to do, was to go with my first commitment to the school and the people who really wanted me. But interestingly enough, our first game, my freshman year, 1993, was against those same Arizona State Sun Devils down in Tempe, Arizona, and we lost 38-0. And Jake Plummer came in that game and had a good game. Ended up eventually taking them to the Rose Bowl. And as it would be, I was on a recruiting trip that year with Jake Plummer. So it was just an interesting dynamic, just a lot of things just happening for a reason. And as it worked out, it worked out for me. As you mentioned, I was a first-round draft pick. And who knows? I was recruited as a defensive back there. I was going to play corner, maybe free safety. I was recruited as both at Utah, and it just worked out. A lot of people said, even though they were recruiting me as a defensive back, you might be a pretty good college receiver too. And Fred Graves, man, who knows how to get the best out of you, was the receivers coach. He was the one recruiting me, and he saw something in me and made me work hard and taught me about playing the position of wide receiver, taught me about work ethic and what it took to take that next level. I'm not even talking about on the field. He told me work ethic off the field, taught me work ethic in the weight room, things of that nature. And, that I owe him a lot to about my career and what would help me get to the first round in the National Football League. Because he taught me, he wouldn't let me settle for just being okay. And I appreciate him for that.
I got to know Fred pretty well. His wife, Michelle, was the office manager in the communications office in athletics where I worked. And so I got to know him, and he moved on to the NFL himself, had, I think, a 16-year career as an assistant coach. But you talk about Fred, at that point, Kevin, Utah football wasn't what it is now. I mean, Ron McBride was building things. They had, a 6-6 record in 92 when you were a guy looking to come in here. And they had to kind of sell you, I think, and my guess is kind of on, hey, you can be a guy who can help us build this thing. And Fred was going to be part of that. How much did Fred and just his knowledge and sort of his personal attributes help you decide to ultimately come to Utah?
Well, I'm raised by a single mother. And, and I think one thing, they came in and they gave my mom confidence that they would look out for me, that I was just going to go up there and just play football, that I was going to go up there and get my education, and they were going to see to it that I was going to do what I needed to do. I was not going to leave there without a degree. And I think that was important to my mom. And I think to their advantage, being down the road, if you will, from Clearfield, they were able to build that relationship with my mom. I was able to go to a game here and there. Those types of things where Arizona State, who came in kind of late on the recruiting process, and you get caught in the glitz and the glamour of being in the Pac-10 versus at the time the WAC. That confidence my mom had in them, and having a quote unquote father figure in Fred Graves and even Ron McBride to a certain extent. He was kind of that grandpa that we all loved. That played a big part in me deciding to go there. Again, Fred was the one who recruited me from University of Utah. Interesting fact is, Kyle Whittingham was recruiting me that year too. Him and Gary Anderson, they were at Idaho State. They were also recruiting me at the same time. And then he ended up being there same year as me. He came the same year as I. It's a good thing I didn't pick there to go to school.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it did. And he was recruiting me as a defensive back as well. I owe a lot to Fred Graves and Ron McBride, man. They just challenged me. They wouldn't let me accept being mediocre, and not just mediocre. And I'm talking about football, just in life in general, and especially academically. And he made sure I was taken care of on that end.
You know, Kevin, Kyle Whittingham has taken a lot of guys like you, especially in recent years, who play both defensive back and receiver in high school, has brought them in and said, hey, I can make you an NFL caliber defensive back. But I'm guessing in your case, Fred Graves made a pretty strong argument to keep you on the offensive side. He knew what he had, and he won out in that case. And it's just crazy how it worked out for you. You come in as sort of an under-recruited in-state kid, and 4 years later, your first-round draft pick in the NFL. Today's show being brought to you by Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi and some friends and get in the game. Pepsi, proud partner of University of Utah Athletics. One of your more famous plays happened your redshirt freshman year. Mike McCoy, a desperation heave to the end zone late against Arizona. A one-handed grab by you on 4th and goal. Utes win the game. You know, as an in-state kid who grew up watching the Utes, to know how big that season was to the program, to turn the corner for Utah football. As you look back at that moment, Kevin, your emotions and what you were thinking as you had a chance to make that play late in the game against Arizona that year.
Well, when you're a freshman, you just happen to be out in the field. I mean, nowadays there's more freshmen playing than when I was coming up. Back then, it wasn't a big deal to redshirt. You know, that was kind of the norm, if you will, because they would extend guys' careers to build. Now, guys leaving so much earlier now, so much more frequently now than even when I was coming up. You had to be the elite of the elite to leave your junior year. You know, that type of thing. But more often than not, guys stayed all 4 years. And so it wasn't as a big a deal to redshirt. And so for me, for a freshman, I was just playing behind Deron Claiborne, Curtis Marsh, and things like that. I think I was the third guy that year. Me and Jamil Williams, we were kind of that third, fourth guy. I was just happy to be out there, you know, and that was an opportunity to make a play that I don't think I was going to get the ball. In fact, Mike to this day will tell you, he was throwing to me, but if you watch the film, you look in the back of the end zone with his hands wide open, straight open, is Curtis Marsh, our number one receiver that year, had a great, phenomenal year that year. And he's wide open in the back of the end zone. And Mike still to this day, so he's throwing it to me. But you go into a redshirt freshman, the guy who's making plays for you all year long. But,
right.
But, as people like saying, Coach Graves tell you, man, at some point your number's going to be called and you got to make a play. And he would always tell us, quarterbacks, they're good. And they get a lot of attention for a lot of reasons, and rightfully so, but receivers make quarterbacks. And he would say that in this. They got 300-pound linemen barreling down on them. Every throw is not going to be perfect. Every throw is not going to be where you want it. You're going to have to make a play at some point that's going to help your team win. And, that always stuck with me even when I went to the pros. And that's kind of how I felt even at that moment, being a young guy. The ball's in the air. There wasn't no thinking. It was just like, here it is, catch it. And then you get in the end zone, So definitely been a highlight of my career, on my life, as far as being a part of something athletically like that. Man, it's just something every now and then you just be reminded of it.
One of the biggest plays in Utah football history, no question. Again, the first 10-win season for the Utes back in '94 that really turned the tide of the program and helped it become what we now enjoy today with Utah football. So, Kevin, for you, first team All-WAC, your last 2 years, over 800 receiving yards both years. And, you and Steve Smith, were sort of victimized by where the program was at that point. He was a great talent, all conference, but neither one of you were All-Americans yet. You went on to be drafted fairly high, and you went first round. To go from the WAC to not being All-American to become a first-round draft pick, that was a pretty big leap for you as you wrapped up your career. At what point, Kevin, did you hear from NFL teams and scouts that, hey, I got a chance to go that high? Did you think you'd be a first-round draft pick in that draft in '98?
No, actually, after my junior year, I had a pretty good year my junior year. And my name started getting mentioned. I started moving up the quote-unquote rankings that year, even though they had a pretty good class. You could look at the Florida receivers and Riedel Anthony and Ike Hilliard, and then Joey Kent was down in Knoxville, UT Knoxville. Then you had Derek Mason in Michigan State. You had, I'm trying to think, there was a few other receivers that year, and it was kind of a deep class receiver. But I was kind of in that next tier. I was starting to get conversations, get agents, hey, are you coming out? I was graduating, so I was going to be playing my senior year. I had already about to graduate that spring. So people were actually, I was like, wait a minute, I'm getting a lot of attention. I didn't understand. And it was something else. Like, I never thought I was going to be that guy to have a consideration of leaving early. And so to me, I just was hoping to, in the back of my mind, to maybe get on as a free agent. I never thought about being drafted. You know, I was always kind of that skinny kid from Clearfield, Utah. I just was hoping to, you know, get an opportunity. And if I made the practice squad, that was good for me. You know, that's kind of how I've always attacked it. And even when I got in the league, kind of had that mentality. And I was just appreciative, and I wanted to prove my worth. And so that January, you know, you got to decide, you got to declare, and in February, I was like, you know, if they're talking about me now, then I can build myself up and potentially go up. And I was thinking, you know, second, third round pick then.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking, man, that's good for me, you know.
Right.
And so I really buckled down. I had one of my best off seasons, man, and I continued to move up the rankings a little bit. And, you know, I got as high as number 2 ranked receiver in the country that year. And, you know, the rest of it happened how it happened. You know, I had a good off season, had a good Senior Bowl, performed well in my pro days. And, you know, Randy Moss, you know, who probably was the number 1 receiver at our draft that year, he had some off-field things that at that time when people were way more conscious and cautious about those types of things, that seemingly more than they are now, you know, he kind of fell, which in essence kind of made me fall too, because I was getting rated as high as a top 10 pick. And so when he dropped, I dropped. And so as it worked out, he had a great career. And, you know, I had injury-riddled kind of career, and, you know, had to transform myself. And it's interesting how things happened. Had I did what I had planned in my mind as far as playing career, I wouldn't have done the things that I'm doing now as far as personal growth. I wouldn't have gone back to school. I wouldn't have done some of those things. So interestingly enough, it made me become more of a complete individual in my respect to me than I don't think I would have done had I had the career that I had envisioned.
Well, it all worked out quite well for you. A number 16 pick overall by Tennessee in the 1998 draft. And I tell you what, Kevin, you've had a knack for being a part of some of the biggest plays wherever you've been. I mentioned that one-handed grab at 94 for the Utes in the Fiesta Bowl. So in 2000 playoffs for the Titans, and you know where I'm going here, one of the more famous plays in NFL history. It's easily a top 10 play. The Music City Miracle play. You take the lateral from Frank Wycheck. You go 75 yards for the game-winning touchdown in that wild card playoff game. Let's talk about that play, Kevin. Did you guys work on that? Did it work out exactly as you had it planned, or was it just a complete ab lib for you guys to make that play happen the way it did?
Well, a little bit of both. That play had been practiced week in, week out. It was, you know, I wasn't a part of it. You know, it was one of those things. It was, you know, if you weren't part of the kickoff return team, you just, you know, you're halfway to your car. You just waited for walkthrough to be over so you can go home or go to the airport, whatever it is that we. And so, but you know, you watch it, you paying attention, but you're more or less just like, let's get to this. We're never going to run it. It's not something we're going to do. But in essence, I wasn't supposed to be a part of the play. So around midway towards the end of the third quarter, I started cramping up. It was cold. Go figure. I didn't realize that you can dilute yourself so much by drinking too much water and dilute yourself. And so I was cramping up. So I went to get IVs. Well, during that time I was getting an IV, Derek Mason received a punt and got hit and got concussed. Well, fast forward to this moment and they start calling my name. Well, his backup is Anthony Dorsett Jr., and he was cramping up, so he couldn't go.
Oh, wow.
So they calling me. Yeah. So they started calling me, and I'm like, why are you calling me? They just took the lead. I'm only on the hands team. Like,
yeah,
they're not onside kicking. They're not doing an onside kick at this point. And it's like, and then they start saying, hey, we're going to do home run throwback. You get out. Hey, they're going to squib it to Frank. He's going to get it. He's going to lateral across the field. You getting pitch relationship, blah, blah, blah. And Isaac Bird, who would have been in my spot had Derek Mason been in the game or Anthony Dorsett been in the game, he was moved over to that role. And then I went to his spot, and he's also trying to explain to me, hey, just get behind me. They're going to lateral to me. Just get behind me. If I get in trouble, I'm going to pitch it to you. I'm like, all right, boom. The ball's kicked. Well, the ball's kicked a balloon in the air when everything we had worked on was some sort of squib.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just found out like 2 years ago, we did a little thing out here in Nashville with me, Lorenzo Neal, Frank Wycheck, and Lorenzo shared that before the ball was kicked, he told Frank, when I get this ball, come get it from me. So if you watch him, he ordained it. He knew he was getting the ball. So, but if you watch him, he gets it. He doesn't even look to see where Frank is. He starts running and knows Frank is coming to get it. So Frank gets it. And the other thing is, and I haven't asked him 20 years later, I wanted to ask Isaac Byrd why he ended up coming up to field the ball as he did, getting himself out of position. So all these things that didn't work quite the way they were supposed to ended up making the play work the way it did. And I was the last man standing, and I just took a step back, and I don't think Frank even knew who he was throwing to. He just did with his job and lateraled it, and I caught it. And I started running, and people have asked me over the years, what were you thinking? I said, the only time I can remember thinking anything was when the kicker finally went down. I was like, I'm about to score. Well, I take that back. There was a moment when I thought, okay, I need to get out of bounds to save time to kick a field goal. And then it was like right around the same time the kicker went down. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to score. And this kept running, man. And, history was made.
History was made. The Music City Miracle, again, easily one of the top 10 plays in NFL history, and you were a part of it as a young guy in the NFL. Unfortunately for you, Kevin, you know how this stuff works. The game giveth, the game taketh away, and 3 weeks later in Super Bowl 34 against the Rams, you caught a pass for potential game-tying TD. You're stopped a yard shy of the goal line. Listen, you play football long enough, that's how it goes, and for you, have you accepted that's just part of the game, or is that still tough to think about? Man, I was so close and got stopped short. At this point, 20 years later, what are your thoughts about that play?
Man, I couldn't have said it any better than you. It's the football guys giveth and they taketh away. I mean, it's over the years, I'm very appreciative of the fact that I was a part of that. But for me, as you mentioned about the Freedom Bowl and even the Music Miracle, and I can go back to the Air Force game when we came back with less than 2 minutes in the game, down 17. We had to come back and beat them, and I had the game winner. I mean, I can tell you instance after instance of where I was successful at that point in the game or that moment, and that was the one time in my life that I wasn't successful, and it was the biggest stage, the biggest moment in my life, and to come up short. It was tough to deal with. It was very stressful for me, but it was motivating as well. I wanted to get back to that moment. The Super Bowl is a special event, man. I can't. People have asked me over the years, like, how is it going Super Bowl? And it's almost indescribable to be a part of that game. And there's only a few people, and I know there's people that were drafted with me. There's been guys drafted after me and guys drafted before me that never got that opportunity because it is so hard to get to that moment. The Patriots aside,
yeah,
it is very hard. It's very hard to get to that moment, and so to not only get there and then to get to the end with the ball in your hand and to come up short, man, it is as hard a thing as an athlete that I've ever had to endure. It took me a moment to just think that through, the fact that I didn't score and what that meant. It was over. Like that season, it was so dramatic. You talked about Utes Miracle. I can go back to the first game of that year when we had a game-winning drive to kick a field goal to win. Like, we had game after game, situation after situation, where we had always found a way to win. And to get to the final game, final play, to not get it done, it was rough. That was hard. It was one of the hard things I've had to deal with on a athletic perspective. But to your other part of the question, I've grown to appreciate it. Again, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of guys that I've played with, a lot of guys before me, even after me, that will never and have never had the opportunity to get to that moment and play. I've played in 2 Super Bowls, and so it's still special to me. I just hate it because every year we're talking about it, and I take it with a grain of salt. It's a good conversational piece. When I finish writing my book, it'll be in there, obviously. So, it's been fun, man. It's fun to watch it, remember it. I still have not watched the Super Bowl in its entirety. I do have a copy of it. I just haven't watched it. Wow. Even when it's replayed, I haven't watched it on, like, when they replay, like, on the NFL Network and things like that. I still haven't watched it. I feel like one day I will. I know I will. It's just one of those things, I know the outcome, and that's good enough for me right now.
Yeah, as I said, just a yard shy of being the hero to tie the game, but that's how sports work. Visiting with Kevin Dyson, former Utah and NFL standout receiver. Today's show brought to you by University of Utah Health. With 16 convenient neighborhood health centers, we have a game plan for your family's health. Visit uvuhealth.org. Well, Kevin, tell you what, as you mentioned, 2 Super Bowls in your career in 6 years. That's pretty good. You finished up with the Carolina Panthers in 2003 and also acquired by San Diego in 2004. You signed with Washington in 2005. You had 18 touchdowns in the NFL, over 2,000 receiving yards. And then you moved on to the next phase of your life. And for some people, that's really tough, but you have done so well for yourself since then. You know, you've gotten into education. Now, I know you've been a high school football coach. You're now a principal at a middle school. At what point did you decide to get into education as your post-football career?
You know, when you do something for so long and then you play professional sports, there's really no blueprint to adjust with life after sport. You know, have been playing sports since I was probably 4 years old. You know, school was always in the mix, you know, as far as elementary, secondary school, and of course, post-secondary going to University of Utah. It was always there, but sport was always a big part of my life. And up until I was 30 years old, then it's like, okay, it's not anymore. What do you do? You know, so the natural thing was, you know, I like to believe I was a smart player. I wanted to coach, wanted to give back in some kind of capacity as far as teaching the game. But I didn't know if I wanted to do it professionally or not. I sought some opportunities, even in the University of Utah, some other things, and they just didn't pan out. And so I got an opportunity here at a small private school, working part-time and coaching, and I enjoyed teaching the game. But I still didn't know if I wanted to do it professionally. Again, I sought some more opportunities, and I want to get back because I felt like there was still something about me wanting to coach. But then I kind of started getting a little more versed on this level, and I became a head coach, coordinator, and a head coach, and had some success there. But it was still something else. I just needed another challenge, and that's what it was. It was just I wanted another challenge, and I wanted to reinvent myself and challenge myself to do something different. And the opportunity presented itself, and I took the opportunity. And lo and behold, I've ended up making a career out of it. Did I think I'd be doing this if I told you, if you would ask me if I knew I was going to be transitioning to become a school administrator or get my doctorate or things of that nature? Absolutely not. That was never on my radar. Football was never far from my mind. Still not. I still try to stay attached to the game as much as I can. But one of the hardest things to do is transition and reinventing yourselves. And I hear those horror stories about players that, you know, when they leave the game, they lose everything they had, money, house, family, cars, whatever it is, they lose it all because they're unable to adjust to life after ball. And one of the first things my mom told me as I was leaving the pros and everything else was, just remember, football is what you do. It's not who you are. And that used to always play in my mind as I was transitioning and even when I was going to school and as I was trying to prove myself on this side of things. Let's be real. I still get people that come to me and want to talk football, right? And I haven't played football since 2005. So, and I still get people that want to talk about me, where they were, where they see a miracle, even though I haven't done that in a very long time. And I've done this as far as education longer than I did the playing part. So I know that that's coming in, and I appreciate those conversations. But my point in saying that is, I had to reinvent myself and prove myself every day. I feel like that I'm not just a football player, quote unquote, that I can do something different, and I am doing something different. And, you know, you heard me talk about it just a few minutes ago. Not everybody's a Hall of Famer. The NFL is not made up of Hall of Famers. Hall of Famers are great, and they get all the notoriety and accolades that come with their ability and their skills and everything that comes with that. But the NFL is made up of role players. And I happen to have been a role player because of injuries, if you will, and situations and things of that nature. But I had to do something different. I was 30 years old at the time. Like to believe I got a long life to live. So I couldn't just sit at home and sulk. I couldn't just sit at home and not do anything. So I had to reinvent myself, and, you know, still working. I'm I'm still growing as an individual, trying to be the best version of myself as I can. And, hopefully one day I'll feel satisfied and I can go on and do something else.
Well, it's been a great run for you and a terrific transition to the workplace. 2 master's degrees from Devecca Nazarene University in education. And you mentioned you earned your doctorate. I mean, that's hard to do, especially when you're working in addition to earning your degree. And you earned your doctorate in education and in leadership and professional practice. I tell you what, you've done a lot in your lifetime, Kevin. That doctorate, where does that rank on your list of accomplishments in your lifetime?
It's interesting. I've been asked that before, and my response has kind of raised some eyebrows. It's one of my greatest personal accomplishments I've ever done in my life. And people say, you were a first-round draft pick, man. You win the National Football League. Yes, I'm one of the few people that has done something that only 1% of the population has done on educationally and athletically. And I'm very proud of that fact. But the reason why I say this is one of my greatest, if not the greatest accomplishment of my life is because sports, athletics was more natural. I wasn't an academic. I wasn't that kid that just got straight A's in school. I just solid. I wasn't great. I wasn't a failure. My mom said I had to have a B average. I did just enough to have that B average. But I never considered myself an academic. So to go out and essentially get the highest degree I can attain in education, in school, and write a book, essentially, man, that to me, I would have never, ever, ever thought that was ever possible. I didn't think I had the ability. I shortchanged myself from an intellectual standpoint. I shortchanged myself from a writing standpoint, reading standpoint, all those things that I was fearful of growing up as a young man that I wasn't quite adequate enough or good enough in academically, that I shied away, wouldn't answer questions in class. And to me, that was redemption for that young Kevin who didn't have confidence in himself academically to say, man, you know what? I can do it. I could have done it. And so that's one of the reasons I do it now. I hope I've inspired my own kids and even kids that I come across. Like, man, you can do something more than what you even give yourself credit for. And that's one of the reasons why I went ahead and did it. And I say it's one of my greatest personal accomplishments in my life.
Well, you should be very proud of that. I'm going to give you your proper due. Dr. Kevin Dyson joining us here on Utes Insider, presented by Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi and some friends and get in the game. Pepsi, proud partner of University of Utah Athletics. Kevin, I know your background. You grew up in predominantly a single mother home, 4 kids in the house. That's not easy. And when you've got a mom and 4 kids, she gets stretched pretty thin. And you see kids really become self-starters. They kind of learn from an early age that, hey, if I'm going to get this done, it's up to me to find a way to do it. And you see kids who can get through that and make it do very well for themselves. How much did your upbringing and just your life situation, your mom, I know, did the best she could, but it still was what it was. How much did that upbringing help shape you into the man you are today?
Man, absolutely everything. My mom taught me work ethic. She taught me perseverance. She taught me grit. She just taught me the importance of education. She taught me the importance of respect, just a lot of things that you sometimes take for granted. I'm the oldest, so I had a lot of responsibilities, even as a young man, for my little brothers and sisters, that carried over into life, motivation and work ethic. I told my mom at 11 years old that when I go in the pro NBA at that time, I wanted to play in the NBA. That I was going to go pro and I was going to buy her house. And that was my ultimate dream.
Yeah.
So again, everything was centered around sports, right? And so I told her, when I get there and buy your house, and my mom was like, yeah. And she came home one day with the statistical probabilities of that happening in each pro sport. And the numbers were so astronomical, like it was almost defeating. Like, dang, what makes me this 1 out of 3 million to actually make it, or whatever the numbers were. They were very high even back then in the late 90s, late 80s. And so you think like, dang, man, how am I going to be that one kid? But when I think back on it now, I'm realizing the reason she did that was let me know that's fine to dream, but you got to have something else, a fail-safe, a backup plan in case your dream doesn't work. And she used to always say, I'm not raising any dummies. And so she wanted to make sure we went to school. And again, as I mentioned before, yeah, school was there, but it was a means to an end. I only did the school thing so I can play sports. I had to be eligible. My mom's side had to have a 3.0 or better to play sports. So I did just enough. If I struggled in chemistry and got a C, well, I made sure I got the A in PE, whatever it was, to balance that C out,
Right.
So it was one of those things, man. And again, I learned through the process. I learned through it. And I think going through some of those hard times where you're eating cheese and bread for dinner and things like that. A lot of people don't realize the struggles we had because we didn't let nobody know that we were struggling at times. But that stuff helped me. That helped me from a character standpoint, helped me from a motivational standpoint, helped me from a work ethic standpoint. There's some of the stuff you have to go through, some of the fires that you have, the burning sands that you have to endure to get to the other side, man. I think helps you from a character standpoint and the work ethic and motivation. And, not that I wish that on anybody, nobody wants to wish that on any child, but sometimes I'm grateful for it because it's helped me, and I haven't always been the best dad myself. And I had to be humbled enough to take a step back and say, I can be better at this even as a father myself, but again, I give a lot of credit to my mom and helping raise a young man that's motivated and knows how to persevere over hard times.
Well, you certainly have done that in your lifetime. You are now the principal at Grassland Middle School in the Nashville area. You've earned your doctorate in education. Kevin, you're still a young guy. You've got a lot of years ahead of you. What's next? I know you've done some coaching. You've been a high school AD and now, as I mentioned, a principal at the middle school level. What's next in the next 10 to 15 years for Kevin Dyson?
Oh, man. Well, like you said, I'm always trying to reinvent myself. So I'm probably going to, I've written a book. I'm about done with it. I just need to probably write a few more things and just feel comfortable enough about sharing it and going that route. I'll probably do some things with the Music Miracle, I'm sure, something around there, shirt sales, who knows. And then, we'll see. I think, I do enjoy what I'm doing. I'm teaching college courses too. I'm doing that as well. So who knows? I may transition to that more full-time, teaching college courses in a few years. I'll also do some things with some nonprofits out here. I'm on 2 different boards that both of them are centered around helping kids, which is ultimately what I wanted to do, help kids in any way I can, whether I'm in education in the building or doing something with some nonprofits, things of that nature. So, I think right now, without trying to predict the future, I think I know I'll be doing something with kids, and will I get back into coaching as far as around here, like coaching my son or coaching as a retired educator on a high school team, maybe. We'll see, but I'm gonna try to be the best version of principal that I can be, get as good at this as I possibly can, and then in a few years we'll adjust and. I'm joining radio. I may do radio for the latter part of my career. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I'm going to be looking to start my own podcast. So I'm trying to continue to grow as an individual, man, and trying to find ways to keep myself interested and engaged, and hopefully share what I've learned over the years, and hopefully I inspire somebody along the way.
Visiting with Dr. Kevin Dyson, former Utah and NFL standout receiver. Today's show brought to you by University of Utah Health. With 16 convenient neighborhood health centers, we have a game plan for your family's health. Visit uvuhealth.org. Kevin, before I let you go, it's been, 25 years almost since you competed for the Utes. I like to ask players this. We talked about that touchdown grab and the Freedom Bowl against Arizona. You mentioned the big comeback against Air Force. You had a great career, but on a personal level, as you look back at your days at Utah and being part of building the program under Ronnie Mack and Fred Graves as your position coach, what do you remember the most about some of the guys you hung out with, just the times you had, and just that process of personal growth as a college student athlete? What do you remember the most about your days at Utah?
Well, I will say this, especially from that time back then, and to me, what's special is how many guys I met from all over the country that have been friends since. Got guys from Washington, D.C., from California, from Florida, from Idaho. Just guys come from all over the country for a common cause and still remain friends after all these years and still be able to have these conversations and talk about, man, you remember that one time we went to so-and-so spot and so-and-so did this, man. It's just been, it's special, man. And I think Utah maybe more so than places like Alabama, for instance, especially back when we were playing ball where we were building something up. I think we appreciate it a little bit more than if you go to somewhere like in Alabama right now where there's kind of this expectations like we're fighting for national championships. Like that's first thing in. Where us, we were fighting for respect every week. We were trying to BYU was at that time getting all the respect. They were the only one anybody ever talked about in the state. It was a blue state, if you will, compared to what it is now. It's more of a red state. It's more of a Ute state.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was a blue state. So we were fighting for that. We were fighting for that respect. We were the Rodney Dangerfield, if you will, of the thing, even though Utah State was kind of also the little brother up the street. But we just felt like we were just trying to find that respect. We got a lot of guys with that kind of that mentality that we always got something to prove. And again, I think that type of thing helped mold me and helped build me up because that was the mentality. And that kind of goes with the same thing with Fred Graves and Ron McBride. Anyway, they kind of both had that mentality too. So I think that's one of some of the most special experiences that I have is some of the guys that I had met that I genuinely probably would never had opportunity to meet if I didn't stay at University of Utah. Because even going to Arizona State, a lot of those guys from this guy's from California, but a lot from California, Arizona. There wasn't that unique feel. We had guys from Texas, Florida, Virginia, Washington, D.C. We had guys from all over with different personalities, and it just made for a fun and interesting 4 or 5 years that I spent at the University of Utah.
Well, you had a great run, as I mentioned, 2-time first-team all-conference. You left as the all-time leader in receptions, second receiving yards. Those records have stood to this day in Utah football history. Kevin, before I let you go, I want to go back to your role as the pre- and post-game analyst for the Titans in the NFL. Utah and the Pac-12 are entering this world now of competitive football in the COVID-19 era where you have testing, you have games being played in front of no fans or very few fans. It's a tough transition. The guys you've worked with and talked to at the NFL level, how they dealt with all this year. I mean, from an emotional standpoint, football is such an emotional game to not have, sellout crowds and just this different environment. It's been a different year. How had they handled this at the professional level, in your opinion?
Well, I think ultimately, and I'd be interested to hear from a kid standpoint. When I say kid, a college kid compared to a professional.
Yeah.
From a professional standpoint, you look at we're self-motivated, right? We're motivated by victories and making money, right? You want to win, and you're in your contract and things like that. You got to play well to start and things like that. And so guys are self-motivated. And now, not to say they're not in college, but in college, the crowd, the band, and things of that nature, you have to be somewhat self-motivated and self-engaging. You can't rely on that crowd participation to get you up, to get you an edge, if you will, if you're on the defense and they're getting loud so they can't hear the cadence. You actually got to be fundamentally sound. You got to play your game. You got to play your game. You don't have some of those advantages, if you will, from being a home crowd, and vice versa. When you go on the road, you don't lose an advantage in a lot of respects either. So, it makes for interesting football. It's quiet. The energy's not there. It can almost be like a yawn fest because it's so quiet. Like, man, it's like a glorified scrimmage. I went to a Titans game that Tuesday night and we played Buffalo Bills, and it was eerie.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like different. It was like a glorified scrimmage. And there's no, that's the first event I had been to since all this hit. And, when you watch on TV and they pump in the crowd noise, they're not pumping that in when you're in person. So you're not hearing the crowd noise. We're getting a little bit, because I think that game we had like 8,700 or something like that. And so it was a little bit different. There was some noise, but it still was so quiet. It was eerie because how quiet it was. It almost seemed like a glorified scrimmage. But true to being professionals and being pros, them guys got after each other and they played hard. And so watching like the Big 12, Big 10, let's say, play this weekend, SEC's been going on, and watching them in half full stadiums or empty stadiums, and watching the kids being competitive, I've been somewhat impressed because the guys have found whatever that is in them, whether we're just happy to play and we're going against somebody different from our teammates. They have been competitive. The games have been somewhat quality. Now, you've seen some of the games and things of that nature that haven't been up to par, haven't been that kind of quality you would expect, especially at this stage in the game. But we are still watching football at this point in the game. And right now, I think we're all just happy to have that. If nothing else, that seems to be some sort of normal during this time of COVID.
So well put, Kevin. You're right. Normalcy and the COVID-19 pandemic, we're looking forward, and we found it in football, and it's different. But we're so happy at Utah and the Pac-12 to have some games coming up finally in November, December. Well, Kevin, I appreciate your time. As I mentioned, you're a radio analyst for the Titans. You're a middle school principal. You're a busy guy. You've got a family to take care of, and you have a lot going on. But, when I started this podcast, you were one of the guys I had on my list. I'm like, I got to reach out to Kevin. I met you, as I said, 6 years ago when you went into our Hall of Fame. That was a great weekend to have you back in town for. And you're one of the all-time greats. So proud you're a Ute, and so proud of everything you've done. Kevin, continued success, and thanks for dropping by the show.
Man, I appreciate it, brother. Anytime.
Thank you. Kevin Dyson, former Utah and NFL wide receiver. Back to wrap up the show in just a moment.
For more on Utah athletics, including up-to-date schedules and ticket information, log on to utahutes.com. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
Really appreciate Kevin Dyson dropping by the show. What numbers he put up again at Utah. 192 career receptions. That remains first all-time. He is second with 2,726 receiving yards. A terrific career, and I could not have been more sincere when I said that he and Steve Smith deserve to be college All-Americans. But, at that point, the Utah program, it's just what it was. It was a building program with Kevin playing from 94 until 97. Steve Smith came in after that. They were guys who flew under the radar nationally. But again, to see Kevin go as a first-round draft pick in 98, play 6 years in the NFL, to see Steve Smith go as a third-round pick to the NFL, play 16 years. Obviously, they were legit talented guys who deserve more honors, but it just did not happen for them. But still, wonderful careers for those two. And we appreciate Kevin Dyson dropping by the show. Well, coming up next week, we'll catch up with former safety Steve Tate. He played for the Utes from 2005 until 2007. I'm going to ask him about the 04 team that he was a redshirt on, plus the 08 team that he knew a lot of guys from. And so we'll have him talk about his career as well as comparing the 04 and 08 teams. And plus, we'll talk about the Hayes Tough Foundation, named after his infant son, Hayes, who died of brain cancer 4 years ago. It'll be fun to catch up with Steve coming up on next week's show. And also coming up down the road, former volleyball player Kim Turner. She was the first Ute volleyball player to have her number retired. We'll catch up with her in a couple of weeks. Thanks to Mike Gillen on the technical side, and that will do it for this week's show. I'm Mike Lageschulte. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
This has been Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.